if everyone could please try to take their seats so that we can get started. We started this tradition of honoring legends during lunchtime a few years ago. It was a practice our surgical colleagues at the AATS do at their annual meetings, and it's clearly something that has stuck with us. And I think this year is certainly in the course of my career going to be the most memorable Legends Lunch that I've been at. So I think without further ado, we're going to spend the next 75 minutes honoring an icon in our field.
The other mentor that I had then and have now, like I said, my talk yesterday is Maddie Massengill. She has taught me what it means to be a life member and doesn't let me forget it. So that's good.
It's Jeff Ryle. I mean, he's as close to a genius as I'll ever meet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legends Lunch. My name is Ashley Walzak, and I am honored to share the stage with an incredible group today. This will actually be the first year that we are honoring a perfusionist who has gone before us, who has paved a way for our profession, for our schools, and for some of us personally. But before we get to our legend of 2022, we would like to take a moment to remember all of the perfusionists who have gone before us. We have been blessed to be a part of a profession full of brilliant leaders whose shoulders that we're able to stand on. I would like to take a moment of silence now to remember all of those who have passed. Thank you. It is with the heaviest of heart that I announce our legend of 2022, Jeff Riley. Jeff has impacted each and every one of us, watching online or sitting in this room, in one way or another, through his research, through his teaching, his leadership, his mentorship, or even just his friendship. I met Jeff back in 2005 when I was applying to the circulation technology program at The Ohio State University. I read some of his papers and had heard how big of a giant he was in perfusion before I ever stepped foot in his office. When my interview started, Jeff nonchalantly, he handed me a pair of clamps. So I nervously answered his interview questions as I fumbled with this pair of clamps in my hands. And as we were talking, I figured the goal was really he wanted me to try to figure out how to open these. So I began fussing with them until I was actually able to open them. When I did, in his ever so Jeff way, he slyly smiled at me as if I had just completed the task that was really set out for me. He then handed me a square piece of paper with a circle on each of the corners and 4 circles in the middle. He told me that the circles in the middle were marbles and that he wanted me to see how I could get all 4 marbles and into each of the separate holes in each of the corners. So I sat there puzzled for a few minutes, asked some questions, and then it dawned on me that if I spun the paper as hard as I could get all of the marbles to spin towards the outside at the same time, theoretically, getting them into each of the holes in the outer corners. Now this time, I got a huge smile followed by a welcome to the program, Ashley. I've never been more ecstatic. However, those of you who know Jeff know how characteristic that story is of him. He never gave answers, but he gently and gracefully nudged us in the right directions. When we were able to solve a problem, prime a pump, initiate bypass well, he was smiling on the side like a proud dad. I used to get so very frustrated as one of his students that he wouldn't just tell me the answer or just tell me if my answer was correct, or if I was even headed in the right direction. But what I realized many years later was that Riley was someone I learned the absolute most from, because he taught me how to figure out the answer on my own, to be confident in my answer, to be resourceful, to think beyond the surface of an issue. I went on to graduate, and Jeff became so much more to me than a professor. He became a true mentor to me. On graduation day, I said, "Thank you, Mr. Riley, for everything." And he responded, "Call me Jeff. We're colleagues now." Whenever I would call, he would pick up. He would always listen to my entire dilemma before he would insert comments or knowledge. And in the end, he would always challenge me to see beyond my own perspective and to see a new one. He had a really incredible way of seeing the world and challenging each and every one of us in it. Jeff attended our wedding. He became a huge mentor and a friend to me. He was really someone that I would call for advice any day. I was honored most recently to be working with him on the Certified ECMO Specialist exam, and I am so thankful for the time that we had together on this project most recently. On October 15th, when I got the call that he had passed, I was devastated, like many of you were. How is it that our field has lost this incredible giant? It is with great honor today that we present Jeff Riley to you and the legend that he is to our profession. I've had the honor to work on this program with a fantastic committee consisting of Craig Faselka, Jeff Excel, Kenny Shan, David Fitzgerald, Al Stammers, Bob Groom, Tammy Rosenthal, and Kat Mathias from Smith Buckland. A huge thank you also to Mark Cruz for his help in the research behind the content for today. We truly hope to present Jeff and all of the strengths that he had and contributed to our society. As you can imagine, this was a very daunting task. So thank you to the committee for their work to highlight our legend. And I will now hand off to Bob Groom, who will introduce Jeff and his early career.
Jeff Riley's early career. Where shall we begin? Let's begin at the beginning. It all began on a hot Monday afternoon at 5:15 on August 21st, 1950 in Clarksburg, West Virginia at the Union Presbyterian Hospital. He came into the world larger than life at 9 pounds 15 ounces, screaming from the start. Perhaps he was just eager to improve the world. Teaching was in his blood. Dale and Doris Riley, his parents, were both educators. Jeff would tell us that teaching was in his parents' blood, it was in his blood, and it was in the blood of his children. It's evident that from an early age he had an interest in medicine. I'm not exactly sure what Jeff was doing to this patient, maybe just checking pedal pulses. That mischievous look on his face is a little troubling. It looks as though his able assistant was carefully reading instructions. Those of us that know Jeff know that he always did things by the book. From a very early age, Jeff was a sharp dresser. What is remarkable to me about this photo is the slight tilt of his head and the raised eyebrows. That was his signature. When Jeff spoke to a person, he was engaged. It was as though that person were the only person in the room. He would tilt his head and raise his eyebrows and sometimes shake his head a little and blink his eyes. It always made you think, what is he trying to say to me? Jeff was a Cub Scout, a Boy Scout, and an explorer. Close your eyes for a minute and remember the last time you were with Jeff. See him in your mind's eye as a Boy Scout in a Boy Scout uniform. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. That was Jeff Riley, all right. He remained a Scout throughout his life. Why, even his John Gibbon Jr. lecture in 2011, when he was 61 years old, he had a title taken from the Boy Scout motto, "Be prepared." Jeff was, is, and always will be a Boy Scout. He was elected president of AmSECT in 2016 and established a strategic plan focused on 4 words: lead, collaborate, educate, and care. Those 4 words continue to guide the society and its leaders. Since his presidency, those words remain and are displayed along with AmSECT's logo. Years ago, Jeff gave me a copy of this photo from his graduation from Kent State in 1972. He received an undergraduate degree there, majoring in chemistry and psychology. The photo looks more to me like something from a trailer for the motion picture Shawshank Redemption. The other photo shown here looks as though his mother's slipping him a cake with a file in it. Jeff would tell us that some of the greatest discoveries of his life were in operating rooms. During college, he worked as an emergency room orderly and as a surgical scrub assistant. He first witnessed cardiac surgery with cardiopulmonary bypass when he worked as a surgical scrub at Akron City Hospital in Akron, Ohio in the early 70s. What he saw that day set him on a course that would span 5 decades. In the mid-1970s, while in a cardiac operating room, he met Christine Wagner, a nurse at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. He told me that the moment he looked into her eyes, he was smitten. It was love at first sight and a love that endured. They were partners in life, in parenting, and in his career, which he described as an odyssey. This odyssey spanned from coast to coast of the United States and back again, from a community hospital staff perfusionist position to vice president of a large contract perfusion group. Jeff once said that everything that was to happen to me in my perfusion career had its birth at my educational experiences at The Ohio State University from 1972 to 1974. Jeff is shown here on the far left of the CT brochure calibrating a pressure monitoring system. Dr. John Bosco, Jim Deering, and Louis Toth started this program in the late 1960s. The CT program required competitive applications and selected only 8 students a year. Jeff was a student in one of the first classes. Lou is shown in the center panel of this brochure. He and Jim Deering were the architects of the school's curriculum. Lou remembers Jeff as a dedicated student and determined investigator. Here's Jeff turning the tassel when he received the biomedical computing and information processing circulation technology post-baccalaureate certificate in 1974. Here's another photo of Jeff working in the animal research lab in 1975 at Ohio State. This photo was obviously an aha moment as they stared intently at the monitor during this experiment. This was his proving ground in research and education that set the stage for all that was to come. Jeff was a visionary. In 1977, he described in detail how simulation for CPB could be used to teach, an idea more than 25 years ahead of its time. For this work, he received the Polystan Traveling Scholarship Award. This was the beginning of many award-winning research projects. Considering that in 1977, this was before the advent of the personal computer, and this young perfusionist wrote this paper about simulation and total cardiopulmonary bypass. Jeff was very close to Jim Deering and considered him his role model. This photo was taken on the occasion of Jim receiving the John H. Gibbon Jr. Award in 1987. Jeff would go on to follow in Jim's footsteps and become the director of the MUSC program. And then he received the Gibbon Award 24 years later in 2011. Jeff had many research interests, and microemboli was one of them. He did early research with the Hadelon emboli system in the early 1980s. The Hadelon system at the time counted activity, but it was difficult to use as a research tool. So what did Jeff do? He created an analog to digital converter to provide meaningful analysis of these signals and published a series of articles about the behavior of microemboli during crisis. Jeff was a Rolling Stone. These are just some of the places he worked during his early years up to the year 2000. Ohio, Michigan, Georgia, Indiana, South Carolina, and California. Everywhere he went, he touched lives, and he left places better than they were when he arrived. Thank you, Jeff Riley. Your odyssey is over. You've been a passionate and tireless friend. You've worked hard with excellence to always make things better, to bring order where there is chaos. Your odyssey is over now. We miss you, we love you, and we will never forget you.
Now to follow up on Bob's thoughts. I might have two mics right now. Testing. Follow up on Bob's thoughts, we're going to hear a few recorded messages from Al Stammers.
Good day, everybody. My name is Al Stammers. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in this tribute to a remarkable individual, Jeff Brock Riley, who was not only a colleague, a mentor, but was a dear friend and is missed tremendously. For the next several minutes, I will call to attention some of Jeff's contribution, specifically focusing in on academia and research. I first met Jeff back in 1986 at the 24th International Conference. At the time, I was a first-year perfusion student, but prior to that, I had worked in research laboratories at several universities within the Northeast. So I had a real keen interest on what was going on related to perfusion research. So I went to Reno, was at the MGM Grand Hotel, and I looked at the venue, and there was one name that popped out on 4 podium presentations that were going to be held, and that was Jeff Riley. Jeff was truly amazing. Here he was just a few years out of school himself, and he had 4 presentations being given at the largest venue for perfusionists in the world. No surprise to anyone, Jeff's topics were on computer modeling that were being used to develop techniques of data acquisition, as well as on quality assurance and in the field of heparin-coated circuits. I continued to work with Jeff over the years, first as a student when I submitted an article to the journal, and that was in 1986, where Jeff was the editor-in-chief. Jeff was very kind, and he helped me through the arduous process of publication, and he did it in a manner that I thought was extremely professional and caring. A few years later, I went to work with Jeff at the Medical University of South Carolina, where we and several other faculty participated not only in the education of perfusion students, but in the conduct of research. Jeff was inducted into the American Academy as a full fellow in 1990, and I was at the meeting with him, and he instilled with me the desire to continue to expand professionalism by joining this wonderful organization, which I became a fellow. A few years later, we were both program directors, and we served on the Perfusion Program Directors Council, and we worked with many of the program directors to establish standards and guidelines for the conduct of perfusion education. And then most recently, I worked with Jeff on the cardiopulmonary division of the FDA, and we were tasked with evaluating the nosocomial outbreak of infections that were occurring in heater coolers starting in 2015, meeting in Washington, D.C. in 2016 to conduct hearings. But to begin, Jeff was a graduate of The Ohio State University, where he graduated in 1974. Remarkably, he started teaching there the next year and continued to teach there until 1978. He next taught at the Perfusion Technology program located in Grossmont College in El Cajon, California, and he left there in 1989. At the same time, he was the Director of Education and Clinical Research at Psycor, which was the largest outsourced provider for perfusion services at the time. Next, Jeff was recruited and hired at the Medical University of South Carolina to direct their cardiovascular perfusion program. He was also appointed as an associate professor, and he remained there for 8 years, leaving in 1997. In 2003, Jeff joined John Austin working at Midwestern University in Glendale, Arizona. He was hired as an assistant professor and then became the associate program director of the cardiovascular science program. And he was an adjunct assistant professor right up till the time of his passing at that university. Obviously there, he and John worked diligently on early simulation models, some of the first high fidelity simulation models. He was then recruited to Ohio State University and served as the interim director in the Circulation Technology Division from 2003 to 2007. His final teaching appointment, which he held right up till the day of his passing, was a research assistant professor at the SUNY program located at Upstate Medical University. And there he continued work in simulation, working closely with his colleagues on faculty there. It's important to note that Jeff taught the day before his passing to a class of perfusion students. During the same time that Jeff was involved heavily in academia, he was also working with outsourced perfusion providers. We all know he worked closely with several companies in industry on new technologies, but he worked with perfusion providers. Very first one was Extracorporeal Technologies, located in Indianapolis, Indiana, where he was the vice president of education and research. As mentioned, he was at Psychor, where he directed the education and research program. And then also from 1997 to 2000, he worked in the perfusion services division of Baxter Healthcare as the vice president of quality and the director for the Center of Excellence in Perfusion. His last corporate sponsorship and job was working with the Fresenius Medical Care Extracorporeal Alliance, where he was the vice president of quality and the director of academic affairs. One of his greatest accomplishments with a team of hardworking individuals at AmSECT was in the planning of AmSECT University. He served as a course developer there from 2012 to 2019, and he stayed involved up until the day that he passed away, and helped with the rebranding and the relaunch of the university. Some of the modules and courses that he developed as either an author or a co-author are shown here and involve techniques in blood management, education, and you can see the very top line is a mathematics for perfusionist module, which is no surprise since Jeff was so analytical in his thought processes. He developed a number of modules on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, as well as teaching modules for the certification for the ECMO specialist exam, which he and others rolled out as part of the International Board of Blood Management, and is going to be spoke up in another time period during this tribute. And finally, he talked about what the FDA was doing in regards to safety and maintaining heater coolers up to their high level of disinfection and decontamination. Some of the early papers that Jeff published in the proceedings, I'm just going to go over a couple of them. And he obviously was so involved with early computer technologies and integrating them into cardiopulmonary bypass. He began by using the RadioShack TRS-80 microcomputing system, and this had just been launched 2 or 3 years before his publication in 1981. So he was very quick to incorporate this fully assembled microcomputer into perfusion practice. And he chose this computer, interestingly, I believe, was because of its low cost and readily available to all perfusionists, as opposed to some other manufacturers, including Apple, which had perhaps more sophisticated devices, but were much more expensive. In that early paper, he identified various metrics and variables that we should be monitoring and recording during cardiopulmonary bypass procedures, as shown here. And he stated that if we quantify and monitor these calculated variables and then store them for retrieval after cardiopulmonary bypass, the perfusionist will be able to develop a more quantitative approach for patient management. True words which stand tall even in today's environment. Another paper that he wrote was on automated electronic data capture for perfusionists. This is used in more than half in procedures throughout the world today, and Jeff was one of the earliest individuals to publish on this. And he stated, as we discover and define the use and usefulness of sophisticated perfusion parameters in clinical practice, the value is going to be extremely important. In fact, they'll come invaluable. He was involved with simulation, as I mentioned earlier, starting at Midwestern, but really before that, any computer utilization is using a simulation to go ahead and incorporate those data for analytical analysis. And so he served on a number of task forces and committees, both within AmSECT and also within the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. But perhaps he may be best known to all of us for his work with Dr. Rich Talman at Biomedical Simulation, where Jeff served as the Chief Scientific Officer, working with the Califia. And he developed a number of models that are used to this day on Califia, such as cerebral oximetry, gas exchange, and of course, more recently with ECMO. And how many of us have attended one or more meetings where we saw Jeff was conducting workshops or was on a podium presenting on the value of simulation? These were remarkable and well attended by all of us throughout the years. I want to shift and talk a little bit about Jeff's involvement within the Journal of Extracorporeal Technology. He served as associate editors on other journals, but it was really here where he found his highest devotion. This left-hand side shows the year that Jeff came involved with the journal in 1976, and then progressed to the editorship back in 1986 through 1989, taking stints as an associate editor, a manuscript editor, and a senior manuscript editor before he became the editor-in-chief. And in 2003, I had asked Jeff to continue his involvement by heading up the new classic articles section, which he ran from 2003 right up through 2021. Looking at Jeff's accomplishments and publications, both within the journal and with the AmSECT proceedings, is truly remarkable. 92 of these publications are cited, and he participated in these mainly as a initial primary author, but in many he was a co-author, mentoring students and others who were beginning their studies in the field of perfusion. One important attribute of his publications is the magnitude and rate of publications. On the horizontal axis here are the years, starting from 74 when he was a student, right up through 2022. And there are actually several new publications coming out with his name on them. But there were 3 years where he published 7 papers. These are peer-reviewed papers. 2 years where he published 6, and 2 years where he published 5. Truly remarkable feat. Most of us are very happy to have a handful of publications throughout our academic careers. And here Jeff had 139 over his storied time period as a perfusion educator and researcher. Some of the other aspects of Jeff's involvement were in scientific meetings. He would be at AmSECT right now and participating on numerous venues, and as he's done in 2021 and the years before. This was his last formal presentation given at the Cardiothoracic Research and Education Foundation meeting last September. In fact, this was just a few weeks before Jeff's passing, where he was the keynote presenter. And you can see these are the 3 subject areas that he addressed during his presentation, and they were superb. And what was remarkable during this time period, he was severely ill. I spoke with him during the meeting and before the meeting, and he told me about his ailments. And when he got up, he gave his presentations virtually, but as he gave them, they were live. And my wife and I both commented that he just looked very good. He seemed to be strong, and he was as sharp as he'd ever been. So it was really a shock to us when just a few weeks later he had passed. I'd like to conclude with just a couple of pictures. There are thousands of him involved in scientific venues throughout the United States and abroad. And these are just some of the people whose lives he has touched, including my own. I mean, he truly was a wonderful friend, a great mentor, and a genius in the field of not only perfusion, but in scientific analytics applied to perfusion. So I'd like to conclude with a quote from a famous Japanese proverb that states, "Better than 1,000 days of diligent study is one day with a great teacher." And I think that really sets the stage for all of us who were able to spend more than a day with him and owe him so much more in all that he's contributed to both ourselves and to the field. He will be surely missed. Thank you.
This is a challenging presentation. As I'm sitting here, I'm wishing that I had video recorded my presentation as well. I'm never going to forget where I was and what I was doing when I learned that Jeff had passed. And that's going to be something I remember forever. What's hit me this last couple of days is every time over the last 15, 20 years that I've gotten up to a podium, I've always looked out, and you had to look around because Jeff moved around, but you always wanted to figure out where he was because you knew where the questions would come from then. I served with Jeff as president-elect when Jeff was president from 2014 to 2016. And Jeff was a mentor to me. It's hard to put into words, honestly, you know, what that means. We were connected, and while I did not have as long-standing a relationship with Jeff as Al did and Bob did and even Ashley, the influence he had on me personally and professionally was no less than it was for them and many of you out there. We developed a common bond back in 2011 when I was looking at my current position at Massachusetts General Hospital, because about 8 months prior to that, Dr. Tor Sunt, who previously had worked with Jeff at Mayo Clinic, had become chief. And I was contemplating this move from New York to Boston, and I called up Jeff, much like any of you that knew who Jeff was, but maybe never approached him and talked to him. It's a bit of an intimidating, you know, proposition to call him. And like everyone experienced, he was very gracious with his time, and he encouraged me to take the position that Dr. Sunt was an incredibly supportive and visionary chief. It's largely because of that conversation that I decided to make the move to Massachusetts General Hospital, and everything that Jeff told me about Dr. Sunt was exactly true. So we shared that over the last decade, always checking in on how we were doing and how Tor was doing. And with that, I share these words from Tor. Jeffrey Riley was a true professional, taking his role in the healthcare team seriously and advocating for professional attitude and respect of the skills of the modern perfusionist. He was a true thought partner who was excited by new ideas to improve care for our patients and a tireless advocate for the individuals on his team providing perfusion services. He was creative and undaunted by stuffy tradition. "We have always done it that way" was a signal to him that it was likely time for new ideas. He always carried himself with a smile and an upbeat manner, even when conveying information to an unreceptive audience. I think that helped him get away with challenging the status quo. We are all better for having known him and lesser for having lost him. The last time that we were all together was in St. Louis. And during this exact same lunch, we had the privilege of witnessing him and Dave Fitzgerald interview Dr. Bartlett. And in typical fashion, you know, the historical context that Jeff brought to that discussion, you know, you just sat in awe listening to it. I think one of his greatest contributions, and my responsibility here is to talk about his leadership and professionalism, but certainly through his participation in this society, AmSECT. I think is one of his most impressive accomplishments, joining AmSECT in 1974. And then in 1987, he was already voted in as a life member. That's not an easy accomplishment for anyone. I think we have, what do we have, a total of about 36, 37 life members, something like that, over the course of the Society's existence. He received the President's Award in 2020, 13, 12, 6, 2, 1987, and Susan Englert in 2012 had these words saying, "Jeff has a gift for seeing potential in others and bringing out the best in them by being a mentor, role model, and true friend." Perfect description of what Jeff was like. He received the Award of Excellence in 1996, and then the highest level award in our profession, the Gibbon Award, in 2011. He served on our board as his own member from 2010 to 2012, which was when I fortunately really began to develop my relationship with Jeff. In 2012, he was named to a list of 36 AmSECT pioneers in perfusion. And then he served as president-elect under Dave Fitzgerald from 2012 to 2014, and then president from 2014 to 16. We gathered in 2013. I was honored to be invited by Jeff to participate in the development of this AmSECT strategic plan that would be facilitated during his presidency. On the right, this is the group that was responsible for developing that plan. And I was talking over the last couple of days about what an experience that this was, because I know when I worked on preparing for the strategic plan to follow, it was a stressful preparation leading up to it and trying to provide structure to developing this plan. Jeff showed up with nothing to begin with. And then over the course of about 36 hours, developed and framed by just sitting and listening to everyone in this group, this amazing strategic plan with this structure of what now is referred to as the pillars and are now what we refer to in our Pillar Award. This all came from Jeff's work overnight, because many of you know you'd get emails from Jeff at 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, right? And that continues, as Bob alluded to, from this strategic plan development came these 4 words: lead, collaborate, educate, and care. It was one of the most impressive 36 hours watching us go from nothing to this incredibly productive strategic plan that I had ever seen, and I know I was convinced there is no way that I could do it that way. I sat in this seat for 2 years next to Jeff. This is Jeff signing the agreement to switch our management firms from Ruggles to what is now our management group, Smith Buckland. And it was 2 of the most productive and educational years for me to sit next to him and watch him manage a room full of people. Anyone that's interested in leadership, right? You watch how other leaders operate. And the way he would encourage people to share their thoughts, bring forward new ideas, and sit back and listen, and then mold those ideas into action items was nothing short of remarkable. And it's hard to express unless you sat in those meetings how impressive it was to see how he worked and how he encouraged people to share. He did very little talking himself, as many of you know. He would ask the right questions and then sit back and listen to what everyone had to say. So Jeff was the editor of JECT from 1986 to 89. He was also the associate editor from 76 to 81, 92 to 93, 94 to 99, and then over the last 18 years, right up until his passing. In AmSECT alone, he had 92 publications, and you all can go back and read his article, which was his Gibbon Award presentation, Be Prepared, Be Safe, Feel Safe. Jeff led the development of the IBBM, collaborated in the development of the IBBM, but then had a critical role in developing the 3 exams that have now successfully been brought to the community, starting with the perioperative blood management technician exam in 2007, followed by the perioperative blood management specialist exam in 2015, and then most recently the adult certified ECMO specialist exam in 2019. He was the one that created the infrastructure for those exams, bringing the experts together to develop the questions, testing the questions, and then ultimately being behind the grading of all of those exams. I'm still not sure how we're going to fill that void moving forward. Jeff was instrumental in a new program that we started back in 2017 for interested leaders that we refer to as the Leadership Symposium. And he was a mentor of that program the first few years and a faculty member, and he brought this book to us and taught us how to use this leadership matrix. And he showed us how he took members of his team and he slotted them into this matrix, and then how he worked with them in order to try to advance them to, ideally, we have a team full of what we call exemplars that doesn't require a whole lot of leadership input from us as leaders. However, they provide a lot of output, and brought this whole science of how we work with individuals on our team in order to help them improve. He had a number of leadership positions. He was at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester from 2011 to 2016, where he was a director of perfusion services and the ECMO co-coordinator. When he finished his presidency, I was certain he was going to semi-retire, and I remember the conversation when he said, "Hey, I added you to a list to be a reference. Is that okay?" I said, "Sure. Are you going to go teach with Bruce and Ed?" "Well, I'm going to get there, but I'm going to stop in Cleveland first." So he, in 2016, became the System Chief Perfusionist and ECMO Coordinator at the University Hospitals in Cleveland. And then more recently, he was the Chief Clinical Science Officer at Biomed Simulation in California. So as Al alluded to, he was actually originally elected to the Academy in 1990 and then elected again in 2005. He was on the expert panel of the FDA, as Al alluded to, looking at the heater coolers, and Al and him published this article that I would imagine nearly all of us have read, considering the impact of heater coolers in our cardiac operating rooms. He was on the ELSO Simulation Task Force for the last 10 years, Society for Simulation in Healthcare, 03 to 06, 08 to 09, and 18 to 21, and the Society for Advancement of Blood Management from 13 to 16, and then more recently 18 to 21, demonstrating his commitment to being a professional and participating not only within our own organization, but outside of our organization in ways that would benefit perfusion. He had a master's in health professions education. I, for a long time, didn't know what MHPE was. That's what that stands for, from 2003 at Midwestern University. This is incredibly interesting. Many of you see CCT, and I can't possibly be the one to speak about back in the 70s when that was, but I know there was a lot of passion between what was becoming the American Board, which everyone knows the American Board came from AmSECT originally. At the same time, at Ohio State University, they were developing their own certification process. And anyone who completed that process, which I believe included an exam, had CCT next to their name. And anyone that went through that program often will have those initials next to their name, as Jeff did, CCT. Then the American Board. You're reading that correctly. Jeff took the exam 3 times. So if you add that to the Ohio State exam, he took the exam 4 times. And as Bob Groom told me, George, if I'm not mistaken, George Glenn, I think is in here, I think Jeff needed to get recertified before they could make him chief, and you stuck your neck out and said, trust me, you need to hire this guy. And of course, Jeff went and completed and passed the exam again. Is that an accurate story? Fascinating. So I'm going to leave you with this. These are 2 quotes. That I use in my daily routine. One thing Jeff always said to us and said to me often sitting next to him was, I want you to be disruptive. I want you to challenge the status quo. Don't accept that the way we do things is the way we should be doing them in the future. And then this is one. I came to Jeff, I think I called him on the phone, something I was very upset about, and in particular, I was upset about an individual that I was certain I knew what they were doing and what their intentions were. And Jeff listened, and then he looked at me and said, resist the temptation to think you know someone's intention. Always assume they have the best of intentions. And I don't think, since he said that to me probably 9 or 10 years ago, that there's been a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about that. I have a tendency to assume that I know what others' intentions are. And it's something that has stuck with me forever, and I would think would be something that you all should take from this. Thank you very much.
Working on 2 mics here. So I'm going to stay away from that one. Stand right here. I thought we would do something just a little bit different now. So previously, we've heard some wonderful speakers give all kinds of data, and there's so much data to work with about Jeff's professional life. But what we could do now is spend a little bit of time thinking about his family life, which means I have very little data. So I'll right to the source. We have Christine, his loving wife of many, many years. We have his son, Corey, here. And unable to join us are their other son, Brock, and their daughter, Caitlin. And now I'm too close to their mics. But, so, professionalism, clearly in the box, exemplar. In fact, when you look at his accomplishments, I think we all stare slack-jawed at the list, like, how is it even possible? There's only 24 hours in a day. How do you do so much? How does one person produce so much? You've heard the stories of how he can, in a single night, come up with a strategic plan that would take others a week. And that makes me think of our involvements in professional societies. And I've become aware that all of those times, every 1-hour conference call is an hour away from your family. Every 3-day weekend for a conference is 3 days away from your family. Every publication is 20, 50, 100 hours that you could have been playing baseball with your kid. I mean, we are extremely thankful that he did those things, but all of that professional accomplishment is on the back of his family and our families when we do it as well. So I wanted to take a minute, maybe we'd start out something a little bit different. So if you would, please, stand up if you are a student of Jeff's, stand up if you served on committees or worked with him at conferences or any of the societies. Then maybe stand up if you worked directly with Jeff in a financial way. You got paid for working with him. Wasn't a volunteer. If you've seen some presentations, not this one about him, but you've seen his presentations live and in person at some conferences, that ought to take care about the rest of you. Or if perhaps you don't get out of the house much and you've only read any of his 130 articles or 11 book chapters. So all of us standing know and have been directly impacted by the work that he did, which was given to us at the expense of his family. And everybody else that's not standing yet, you're benefiting from it indirectly, because you can't practice perfusion in the United States without doing things that were taught to us by Jeff. So I would like the warmest applause that we can for the family. So thank you, Christine and Corey, for coming, spending some time with us on the stage today. We've had a couple lunches and breakfasts and talked about what we're going to talk about. There shouldn't be any particular surprises for them. No surprises for us up here. We're going to try and share with you the things that the family would like you to know about Jeff that you might not know about Jeff. Jeff the person, the human being, the father, the husband. And we have some questions. So Christine, Christine, now's a conversation. I'm sorry, you folks over there can't see me. I'm right here. I'm right behind the podium. So there was a time when Jeff was a young man, full of vim and vigor, and your eyes locked across an operating room, fell in love, sparks flew. And there was a period of time where you guys were just a couple of young kids in love. Maybe there was married for a couple of years, but tell us about the Jeff before kids. And that mic is hot, so we'll hear anything you mumble to.
Really? No.
You've mentioned to us his interest in the outdoors. He was super active. Would take us sailing.
Yeah, he loved to play rugby, and when he was done with work, he would go out and either play rugby, or he had a boat in Atlanta. We lived about an hour away from the lake, and we would be up there, and he had a speedboat or a catamaran, and so he had spent a lot of time doing that. And
what did you see in him originally? What did you see in him originally?
he cared about people. One of the things that I worked in Open Heart before I met him, and I thought perfusionists were, I'm sorry, but I thought you were, it was like, you guys are just, anyway. He was just, he taught me all kinds of things, and he he cared about the patients, and he was in the room. He wasn't outside. He was there. It was like, wow, this is different, you know? And so it changed the way I saw the whole profession, because I really thought that this was something, you know, it was not, perfusionists were just like, you know, you draw blood and you're out of there.
Pump jocks.
Pump jocks, yeah, you know, and I thought,
Now, did you coin that term, or was
No,
it
no,
just
no, somebody.
that was
I'm
the
sure
term that he used frequently, which was pump
that was
jock?
his thing.
Yeah, somebody else must have done that, because not me. Anyway, yeah, that was, the person that introduced me to him was, it's like, and the people that I knew before him, and I said, anyway, I wasn't impressed with them. So when I was told to entertain him, you know, keep him entertained, because he was, you know, he was gonna be there, and I said, okay, you know. And he was from Ohio, and I said, okay, you know. And then we were gonna go out, and he was an hour late, and I said, okay. Anyway.
Some rocky moments at the start.
Yeah, really, it's like, is this a,
It worked out.
yeah, so.
You had another story that you told me this morning about even, you know, as he was starting perfusion, that he questioned whether or not he was in the right
We
field.
were, you know, he, when we were at Emory, he had to work at Grady downtown, and he had some terrible times where people were dying, and he started questioning whether what he was doing was, you know, he said, I don't know if I should be doing this. I'm killing people. I just don't understand what I'm doing. And it was really it was really bad, because I'd never seen him like that. So, but we, and that was like right around the time I got pregnant, and so, and then Brock came along, and he was just an amazing father. He was like one of those teddy bear fathers, and I was really amazed, because I just wasn't expecting that.
So one of the first things you noticed about him was that he cared about his patients.
Yeah, I
In a
did.
typical way. And then, you know, in tough times, he cared so much about his patients that he wasn't even sure he wanted to continue to do that.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that that instead he turned his energy and his angst into, how can I improve this?
Really. And when you were, no, when they were talking about all those things he had done in the last talk, and I was thinking, I've heard him talk about those things on the phone.
You heard one side of that conversation.
Yeah, but it was like, would you get off the phone?
So you meet this caring guy who seems to locks eyes with you, the chemistry is there.
Yeah.
He cares about patients, maybe that's going to carry over to caring about you.
Yeah.
You develop a relationship, and then you have some wonderful children, and he becomes a big teddy bear. Tell us more about about Jeff the father?
Go ahead.
He was always larger than life as a father. My earliest memories were him jumping in the pool with us and throwing us around, and him getting down on the ground and playing with us, and all the fake wrestling you do with your young sons, and all the teddy bear hugs he gave, just amazing hugs, and I miss his hugs a whole lot. And I just think of, he didn't really bring his work home with him in the sense of who he was as a father. He didn't talk about what he did at work a lot. He got home and he turned on the father button, and that's what it felt like. And it wasn't until I was older till I really understood who he was and what he did, and I just got to know him as the human that he was, giant heart, and just a perfect playmate for a young kid. Yeah.
Great. What did Brock find on this trip?
What did your dad tell us? Be careful, it's hot out here. There are rattlesnakes. And the first thing Brock finds is a rattlesnake.
Because the minute he said that, Brock was looking for
Yeah,
actively,
I know.
actively
Like,
hunting.
come on. Anyway, that was,
Was this a prank that he played, teaching him to ski on the wrong side of a ride on the wrong side?
No.
Is that a handle or
was-
the gear shifted?
Yeah, really. It was just because it was, the balance was better on that side.
So I opened this part of the presentation talking about Jeff's accomplishments and the impact they had on the family. And I've learned through this whole process about how wonderful you were to move around so much. You went from Ohio to Atlanta to California to South Carolina, back to California with a commute to Arizona. Why not stop at Ohio one more time?
Yeah,
You got
really.
Family? Wait a minute, family's not that great. Let's go to Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota for 8 years. You stayed still for 8 years.
Yeah.
But it's so cold there, everything slows down. And then from there back to Ohio, where he then started to commute again all the way to New York. Lived in Ohio, worked in New York, drive back and forth every week. So what was it like? I mean, if I have to move, I'm going to call you because you know how to pack a box, right?
Yeah, really.
And now you've joined us in Syracuse. You're my neighbor now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Welcome to Syracuse. Not as cold as Rochester, Minnesota, but more snow.
Yeah, really. Oh, boy.
So you want to tell me about those time? What was it like to move around so much? There's pros and cons.
Yeah, it was, I actually looked forward to, it was like, oh boy, another house. Let's see if I can get a better one this time.
Not all houses are created equal.
Yes,
No,
I
right?
know.
That's
yeah.
good. There's a pro. Better
Yeah,
houses.
One time I got to actually pick the house I wanted.
He was already working in the other town and left you to pick the house?
Yeah. He was out of town for that.
Yeah.
I said, look, I found us a house. The rest of the time, he was already in the town, and he picked the house.
He was the advanced team, yeah.
Yeah, I said, this isn't good. It's like, well, I signed the papers.
So Corey, for you, were there some pros and cons to living in so many cities throughout your youth?
Yeah, well, when you're a kid, you don't know anything but your experience. And it didn't feel weird or different.
Just thought everybody moved every couple
Yeah,
years.
just thought
Really?
this is what people do. And luckily for me, it's probably different for my siblings. For me, all the moves lined up with something that made sense in my schooling, whether it was the start of kindergarten or the start of middle school or the start of college. They were actually lined up beautifully for me. And every time we moved, it was a different culture that taught me something about life that I would not have known if I didn't live in Charleston, South Carolina, if I didn't live in Southern California on the beach, 72-degree weather, offshore breezes, getting to learn how to surf as a high school student. Like, it was just an awful. So I think it molded me in such a way that I was always able to find the beauty in a new place and make new friends easily. And so it had a lot of good, I think, positive effects on me. But I think it was part of the timing. The timing just worked out. And you know what? He could have moved us to Arizona, and he chose not to. So I could stay through high school or finish high school in California. So he was conscious of that.
I refuse.
I'll give my mom credit for that. Thanks
Mom
for
was conscious.
getting in the middle of that one.
I said, absolutely not.
Putting their fist down.
Really?
And the cons, I mean, it was I can't really think. I'm sure there were more cons for my mom than there were for me, because I was a kid and I just loved new places and exploring, and gave me a sense of adventure.
You didn't learn the 50 states.
Yeah, that was a problem. Because as I left each school district, they taught certain standards at a different year. So I ended up not actually learning the capitals of the states. Every kid in the world I knew could like rat off capitals. I'm like, when did you learn this? When was this? And I know like Charleston, South Carolina, like that history, right? That state history. Then I'd go to California. People would talk about missions and mustard seed planting. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is this culture that you're speaking of? So that was I guess that was a con, but you know.
So, Corey, you got to watch, your dad be a dad. Dad, you and Dad, your siblings. You watched him become a professional. Well, be a professional. Watched him. What was my other note? Do a third thing. You did 30 things at least. And you've gone on. I understand you have a career. This isn't your first rodeo like this. You do conferences within your own profession. Teaching. That's the third thing. And you're a teacher. He was a teacher. So. Are there some things you learned from him and you definitely want to emulate and you try to emulate about father, teaching, and professional?
Yeah. Every time especially in the last 6 months, when I talk to somebody who has known my dad and wants to share stories, common themes come up about him not giving you an answer directly and him asking you questions and leading you in your own path that you get to choose. And he was that way in every aspect of his life, I think, and certainly that way as a father. He never told me what I should do. He never said, you should be a perfusionist. Okay, once he said that. Because I was early in my career and I was complaining about something and teachers don't make money, but perfusionists make more money than teachers do. And he's like, you should try perfusion. Oh, thank you. But I was... my brother and my sister were wildly book smart, and that was not me. And he thought for sure that I needed to learn how to play a sport so I could go to college. Because my brain was not going to get me to college. Because he was always a teacher. He never stopped teaching. If we watched a movie, it was always, what was the moral of the story, guys? If we got home from school, it was, what'd you learn today? And got really specific and made us answer. And if we were at the dinner table or at a restaurant waiting for dinner to come, he'd get a napkin out and write the times tables and make us do them. And I didn't appreciate that, but my brother and sister, so he's like, you're gonna need to learn how to play a sport. So he proceeded to put me in every sport possible, and I was not aggressive, and I was not athletic, and I did not have large muscle, reflexes that can throw a ball well, and so I failed, and he was like, oh, what you gonna do? And then I finally found music, and he supported me in every possible way you could support a child who's interested in music. And that's got to be scary for a perfusionist, to have a kid who's like, I want to be a musician. I want to, especially, growing up with a father like him, who's a perfusionist, I don't think I've ever answered the question, what does your father do for a living, and not had to explain what a perfusionist is. So, of course, I decided to play an instrument that no one knows what the instrument is. I play the euphonium. That was my primary. So I think that kind of rubbed off on me in some way, choosing the obscure field to go into. He was just always supportive, though. And again, he didn't tell me what to do, but when he found that I had a passion, then he would just ask me a million questions that would lead me down the path I would want to take. And he was really supportive in that way. You know, and I think about all the references to leadership and his passion for leadership and his passion for service. And he never sat me down and said, Corey, when you choose your profession, you need to make sure you go all to the conferences. You need to join executive councils or committees, or be part of committees. You have to write papers. You have to do research. He didn't say that was the goal. He just did it, and that's what his teaching method was. He was a model, from what I understand, an exceptional model, and. I saw him go to conferences. He would take me to conferences. We would run around exhibit halls, and that was what I learned. That's what you do as a professional. You join your professional organization, and you serve in whatever way you possibly can serve. And you do it because that's what you do. And by serving, you raise everybody up, and you care about your profession, not just your career, but your profession. And he didn't tell me that was important. He just showed me that was important. And that's who he was, I think, as a teacher and as a father. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. He did that with my sister, connected with my sister about swimming, and towards the end, got to connect with my sister about being a teacher and doing her own research. My brother, he went on countless camping trips, climbing trips. I think he went he got involved with Outward Bound with my brother and went on some pretty extreme week-long camping trips with him that I would never want to do. But that was the connection point with my brother. And he played trombone when he was in high school and did his best to connect with me about me playing the trombone. And he was just that way. He wanted to find that point of connection and meet you there, and then ask you questions until you found your path. And just make sure that you were heading in a direction towards your passion. And I don't think you could ask for a better quality in a parent. And I've certainly learned in my own parenting that, my job is to find out who my daughter is and support and encourage her to be the best human being she can be. And oh my gosh, they're so adorable in that picture. I love that picture. And my dad. So this is your daughter, right? This is Fiona. And she has much of the same energy as my father had, and you can kind of see that in her face in the picture. She's fiercely
wrapped
independent.
around his finger?
Say that again?
Did she own him? Was he wrapped around her finger?
Oh, she owned him, yes. I believe he took that Syracuse job just so he could spend more time with Fiona.
Yeah.
That's why he was in Syracuse. And he got to spend 2 or 3 nights a week just coming over to the house and babysitting her and giving me and Jackie some time out, and he was the grandfather that he was as a father. The first time Feed climbed the stairs, he was literally on his hands and knees climbing up behind her. And I have a video of that, and that's adorable. It's going to be one of my favorite memories of that. But that's who he was, and lots of laughter, lots of tickles, lots of snuggles. He was a teddy bear, and yeah, couldn't ask for more.
You confirmed a suspicion of mine. When he first came to Syracuse, I was like, he wants to work with us. He wants to work with us. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. He doesn't care about us.
I would ask him questions all the time about his upstate experience, and he would talk about you and Ed in such positive ways. And I think he valued very much your friendship towards the end there, very much.
So I saw him when I watched him transitioning to Syracuse. Finally, thank you for starting a family near me, because that made him accept my 456th invitation to come work for us. And in which time he took 2 other jobs before us.
Yeah.
But he came in, and it seemed to me that he was organizing everything that he loved into one place.
Yeah.
I can work in a perfusion education facility. I can be with my son and my granddaughter. My wife said she'll move one more time. And Caitlin was going to join you as well. They bought a house, and everything was coming together just prior to COVID.
And then COVID happened.
Had COVID not happened, very possibly, it seemed like the family would have
Yeah,
relocated.
see?
Yeah. So we have, in our experience, these are words from the lexicon of Riley that he would mention to us. It's kind of a code language. It's like he would say every once in a while, "That's brilliant," which I began to eventually interpret of, "That's not a bad idea." But he's so positive and uplifting.
Yes, really.
Brilliant. Disruptive. It's neat that that's come up in like 3 different presentations now. Disruptive. It's like they aren't going to like that, so you should do it. He said, that'll be disruptive. And then there was a day that Ed and I were preparing for a big conference in Toronto, and we had designed the whole program for simulation, and it was going to be conducted by 4 or 5 different sim labs, and are all coming together. And he looked at that script that we were so proud of, and he looked at it and very casually said, "That's ambitious." And that's when we realized, he said, "There's no way you're going to finish that. You've bitten off more than you can chew." Did he have any code words around within your family life that you knew that there was one word that said so many more things than just the syllables that made up that word?
I have mine. Do you have yours?
No,
Okay, so if you know my father on a personal level, or have worked, I'm sure it appeared in his professional life too. He had an incredibly dry and sometimes very dark sense of humor. And I remember walking into his classroom at Ohio State as a freshman, and him having a slide up of my picture, and him saying something along the lines of, "This is my son Corey. He is single and available." And I would turn around and walk out the room. I was absolutely not single and available at the time, but he liked to play that trick all the time. I would walk into his lab, and there'd be a dog on the table, and that just kills me and my sensibilities. And I'd be like, "Dad, what the hell are you doing to that dog?" And he's like, "You know what I really want to do is I want to give all the kids day 1 a puppy and have them raise that puppy. And then their final exam is putting that dog on the table and running a sim center." Which you just have to know my dad. That's his sense of humor. And, you know, there's no part of me that is more proud that his work led to less dogs on the table. And, but that's who he was. He cared deeply, and to get through that caring deeply, I'm sure every time he put a dog on the table, it killed him. He joked about it. And, you know, I appreciate all those memories. And so the word that comes to mind is anytime me or my brother were misbehaving, and that happened often, he would call us heathens. That was his term of endearment, "You heathens." And I believe it actually came from his parents, because he grew up in a very, how would you describe it, strict Baptist religious household. And he himself, I think, was a very free spirit and was very confined in that space. And I think he heard that word heathens a lot, and he decided to take the word back.
You know, the story about the puppies, at first glance, it sounds as if he's being cruel to puppies, but actually I think he's conveying his care for the patient. And what you want is every perfusion student to understand that being up there on the table is somebody you love dearly. And there's probably a great exercise in making them put their own loved one on the table prior to go get take care of it.
Did that.
Never, no?
No, he didn't actually do that as a friend. I didn't want that to be a rumor started.
In the last couple of years, I began to understand another word that he had a code language for was around retired. And retired meant I only have 2 jobs, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. I live in the Midwest, and I also volunteer for a national organization who studies job practice, and we write assessment exams. That's retired. So what did retired mean? And I started to interpret, I have a different sense of the word retired. And it seemed to be that retired meant that, when we talked about the job in Syracuse that he came to, it was that my family is number one, and the job has to fit into the spaces left over. I've earned that now. And he would demonstrate that for me. We talked about it, and of course, he's like, yeah, whatever, Jeff, just show up. Just come to work, and I'll give you an office. And your name is on the door. His name was on the door next to mine months before he accepted the job. I'd send pictures of it and send it to him. Got a place for you. But we'd be in a meeting. Ed, Jeff, and I are talking about something really stinking important, and one of you would call, and he would just very politely but unapologetically, while I am speaking with him, he'll go. And he would take your call, and I thought to myself, once or twice, I was like, dude, but then I was like, that's so cool. This is the retired job. My family doesn't wait for me anymore. They waited for so long, and now I'm retired. So when they call, I answer. They don't have to wait in line. And I don't know if you felt that. Did you feel more accessibility?
I just thought he wasn't doing anything. Wow, he's not doing
Always
anything.
Syracuse job is easy.
Really? Look, he's not doing anything.
So we're running into the break now, and we could go on all day because there is so much good material to talk about with Jeff. But I really appreciate you guys coming in, and thank you very much for joining us, sharing your stories with us, helping us to get to know Jeff a little more the way you knew him. A lot of the stuff we heard earlier wasn't a surprise to us. We've seen them. Maybe it was informative to you, but this part here was probably largely unknown to the audience. And it's great, as I got to know him, he was a perfusion god, and his accomplishments were unachievable by mere mortals like us. But to then get to know him as a human being, and that he put his pants on one leg at a time. I guess I never saw it, but I mean, it's a phrase. And he had normal things in his life. His professional accomplishments were on the tapestry that I could relate to. He has the same struggles. His car sometimes doesn't work. His family is sometimes happy with him, not happy with him. Sometimes we got to pack up and move. Just normal stuff that we all go through. And to me, that made Jeff Riley, paradoxically, both that much more impressive, that he deals with the same stuff I deal with, and yet he's still 500 times more productive than me. But on the other side, it made him that much more accessible, because I could just walk up and talk to him, because he's just a normal guy. And for me, that's kind of how I feel that's what I hope that this conversation could do for all of you, is that he's a magnificent individual, a pillar in our community, and also he's just like us. He's just a normal guy with normal issues. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Jeff was truly extraordinary in so many ways. But aside from the multitude of career accomplishments, there are three things I found truly remarkable about Jeff. First, I may have posed over hundreds of questions or problems to him over the years, but I never really recall him answering any of them. He always had this way of reframing and turning the question back around on me. He was the perfusion encyclopedia, so I knew he had the answer. But he had a knack for having you talk through the answer on your own, kind of like that Jedi mind trick. These droids are not the ones you're looking for. It was sometimes frustrating, but I always came away from these experiences a little smarter. Second, that he wasn't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom or engage in some of those crucial conversations. To me, this is a leadership skill few can master. He was always, he didn't always agree with me or others, but his engagement in sensitive matters was always professional and respectful, and he often advocated for the thinking outside the box mindset. Lastly, we never refused to help anyone in need. Jeff was really an enigma. He was so involved in so many things, it was overwhelming to comprehend. Not sure where he found the time for everything. There's this saying that if you want something done, give it to someone that is busy. Jeff was always busy, but never too busy to ask others for help in need. The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow once wrote, "When a great person dies, for years the light he leaves behind lies on the paths of men." I think Jeff's legacy will live on for years through his impact in research, education, and professional volunteerism. Miss you, buddy.
It's a couple of my mentors that I've always looked up to, but especially Jeff Riley. Jeff was always a good friend and mentor to me. He was always available to me night or day. He was a gentle intellectual giant and scholar, a brilliant pillar of the medical and academic fields who will be sorely missed. And it'll be very hard to fill those shoes that he's left for us in the perfusion community, but I'll do what I can. It's only been a short 5 months since he left us, way too early and catching us off guard. And I really miss our conversations. It's like somebody stole my computer. I think it was Joni Mitchell that said, "Don't it always seem to go, that you don't know what you've got till it's gone?" Well, we've lost a big pillar. Jeff, I miss you tremendously.
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this tribute to Jeff Riley. Jeff and I were contemporaries, having started in the field in the early 1970s. Jeff began as an OR scrub tech. I was an orderly. Jeff trained at the Ohio State University in a formal program. I was trained on the job. I think in Jeff's case, after he learned perfusion, became a perfusionist, he devoted an awful lot of his energies outside the operating room to writing and editing papers. That is his real legacy, in my opinion. Jeff was editor of the Journal of Extracorporeal Technology for 4 years, 1986 through 1989, and he also edited one of the AmSECT proceedings from the conference, which was no easy undertaking. Bob Groom and I collected a list of all of Jeff's publications just in the AmSECT publications, and it numbered more than 80. But he also published in other journals and proceedings. So clearly Jeff was one of the most prolific and widely published perfusionists we've ever known. Matty Massengale once just described Jeff as a genius. Jeff was clearly brilliant, but not in an ostentatious way. He was quiet and persisted in his academic pursuits. I think Jeff was actually a little bit shy, if the truth would be known. I often thought Jeff marched to the beat of a different drummer, but his academic accomplishments proved he was leading that parade. Over the last several months, many tributes have come in and testified to Jeff's generosity as a mentor and a contributor and leader to our profession. We will miss his presence at the meetings, and to me, Jeff was like a brother. We sometimes disagreed, but I always had tremendous respect for Jeff's efforts on behalf of the profession. He was clearly a giant in our field, and it's a tremendous loss, not only for AmSECT, but for the entire perfusion field in particular. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Tim Dickinson. I thought it would be appropriate to record this message from the same office that Jeff occupied when he was Director of Perfusion here at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Jeff made so many important contributions to this institution during his tenure, and we all know what an accomplished educator and researcher Jeff was. But when I arrived here in 2015, I got to experience firsthand what an awesome perfusionist Jeff was. I got to work alongside of him for a year and a half, and Jeff made perfusion practice look so easy. And of course, he had earned the respect of his fellow colleagues in cardiovascular surgery. On a personal note, when I arrived here in 2015, Jeff made me feel so welcomed and valued. He would go out of his way to make sure that I was adjusting well to the team. He would invite me out to dinner after a long day at work, and we would just chat about things. It was just an absolute pleasure working alongside Jeff. I just wish he would have stayed here longer.
Jeff Riley was my professor at The Ohio State University School of Circulation Technology. However, Jeff became so much more to me than just my professor. Jeff taught me, as a student, to become independent, resourceful, and to become a lifelong learner. He emphasized the importance of service in our perfusion society and getting involved at an early stage of my career. Jeff became someone who I would call for advice on how to handle job situations or references to improve our practice. Jeff also became an incredible leadership mentor to me as I grew in my career, and his advice was always insightful and challenged me to think beyond typical cookie-cutter solutions. He has made an everlasting impression on my life that I hope to continue to share through the upcoming generations of perfusionists. I will truly miss his advice and his guidance in my life.
Hi, I am Louis Toth. I would like to give you a little history of Jeff Riley's career. Back in 1967, Dr. John Vasco, a cardiac surgeon from Johns Hopkins University, received a grant from the National Institutes of Health to develop training for perfusionists, and came to the Ohio State University to do it. I was part of that development team. Our first job was to convince the university administration that we were building a profession and not just vocational education. We argued that there was a professional knowledge base from which there would grow other applications and skills. We needed a curriculum that would encompass the theory, fundamentals, principles, science and technology of the clinical devices and practices. With encouragement from the American Medical Association, the Society of Cardiovascular Surgeons, and others, the Ohio State University Academic Affairs and the College of Medicine agreed to create the Circulation Technology Division and its baccalaureate academic program within the School of Allied Medical Professions. The profession was born. Admission into circulation technology was through competitive application and required 2 years of college prerequisites. Jeff Riley was admitted into the first class. He was a dedicated student and wanted to make the profession a reality. He received an A in each of my courses, including research methodology. Jeffrey wanted to be involved in everything. He even volunteered to help when we conducted seminar workshops for industry personnel who needed to understand how their products worked. Jeff was pleased to share his knowledge and demonstrate his skills as the representative of the new professional. I believe Jeff Riley's life is an inspiring example of professionalism.
How do you want to be remembered when you've had your last trip around the sun? Were you a person that loved and cared for your family more than anything? Did you treat the people you met with respect and as if they were your brothers and sisters? Did you use the talents and aptitudes you were blessed with to their full potential? Jeff Riley was a model for all of us in these respects. Professionally, I think he excelled most as a teacher. He's the first person that I ever met who used way as an answer. Lucy, you need to make an appointment down at Burbage's Meats. Go down there with a 5-gallon bucket and a lot of heparin. When they sacrifice that animal, you hold the bucket underneath the throat, collect the blood, and we'll do the experiment. And Lucy's response was, no way. And Jeff said, no way. He used facial expressions and movements to build suspense, focus attention, and to entertain. He'd scan the classroom back and forth without moving his head, while he spoke in a way that meant, this is critical for your understanding. He'd ask the class a difficult yes/no question, and then just wait a few seconds for a response. If he didn't get one, he'd start shaking his head slowly left and right, as if to say, maybe no. Still no answer? And he'd nod his head up and down slowly, as if to say, maybe yes? Still no response? He'd just turn his head in a big circle a couple times to let everyone know that he knew you didn't have a clue. He knew that memorization of facts was not the most effective method to learn, so he constructed lectures that were more like guided tours than mere dissemination of information. He'd ask questions and then nudge the class with clues into discovering the answers to the concepts on their own. I learned a great deal from Jeff. Maddie Massengale once said that Jeff was as close to a genius as she had ever met. And I agree that he was a genius. I respected him more than any other person I know in perfusion. He was a friend, a mentor, and I miss him.
I've been asked to say a few words about Jeff Riley. It's been fortunate for me to work with him on numerous AmSECT boards and committees since 2006. Jeff had an insight and awareness that I've always admired. He was tireless in his work for perfusion, and he always brought a calm and direct approach to everything he participated in. Jeff inspired us, to give our best. He was respected for his achievements and contributions. He was a mentor, a brilliant individual. He was a model, of dedication and perseverance. Jeff touched many lives. Words can't express the loss we feel from his passing. We honor his life and continue on in the same spirit that he had to meet every challenge. And, we strive only, to leave the best that we have to offer. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have known and worked with Jeff these many years.
I'd like to thank you all for coming. This concludes our Legend Lunch presentation for this year. I hope to see you all back for next year.